Alright, so I'm back. In this video we're going to go ahead and wrap this scene up and finish it. So the last things that we have to go ahead and place materials for are these wooden fence poles. As we can see, this is the latest render here. We've already got the rocks here, as well as the ground, the terrain texture, and we've even got that tin can already with its shader and everything set up. So let's go ahead and let's get going here with these wooden fence posts. So I'll close the render view window, won't need it for the moment. And I'll just go ahead and select this wooden fence pole over here, and we're going to start off by giving this one a sort of wooden type material. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go to the hypershade, and we'll switch from the work area. We'll go to the top tab here so we can see all our materials, and I'm going to go to the shading groups, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a similar shader setup as before. Might as well. It saves a lot of time to work that way, and every time you can shave time off of production schedules is always a great thing. So let's make a copy of the ground material over here. If I go ahead, check this material out over here, I'm just going to select it, go up to edit, and I'll go to duplicate, shading network. Okay, so here's the duplicate. It's going to be called ground mat SG1, and we're going to select this one, right click on top of it, and go to graph network. Okay, so down here let's go ahead and let's maximize this work area down there by clicking on the work area button. And there we go. Now we can get started on this. So let me expand this out. Let me resize this window so it's a little bit easier to see what I'm doing here in the hypershade. And what we're going to do is rename this material first of all. So we'll go to the shading group node and we'll rename this. Let's call this one, I'll just call it fence pole. Fence underscore pole underscore mat SG. Okay, so fence pole mat SG. And then let's rename this actual shader node over here from ground mat 1 to fence underscore pole, and we'll put underscore mat. Okay, so good thing that we copied this, that way we don't have to set up the ambient occlusion and all of that stuff. We can just go ahead and get going here. So what we want to do is change the bump map, the color map, and this cavity map over here. So let's start off with this color map. So we'll go to the color 2 node, double click on it to open up the attribute editor, go to the folder icon here, and we'll load up the wooden fence pole material. Okay, and that's going to be this one over here. It's going to be called, let me go over here, wooden fence pole color. This one right here, wooden fence pole color. Let's go ahead and load that one up. Okay, and we'll leave it for bitmap filters fine. Now you'll also notice here in the hypershade that the texture keeps tiling and repeating over and over again. That's because we had it set to 4 and 4 for the ground material, and since we copied the entire shading network, that property was also copied over, which is obviously wrong. So what we'll do here in the attribute editor is simply switch over to the place 2D texture tab here, and you'll notice that the repeats for the U and V's are set to 4 and 4. So we'll just reset that back to 1 and 1, so it's correct. Okay, close that. And we'll do this for the bump map as well. So let's open the bump map node here. Again, this one has to be set also to 1 and 1. And we'll go to the bump node over here and load up the correct image, which is going to be the wooden fence pole bump, which is right here, wooden fence pole bump. Okay. And let's also do the same thing for the cavity map down here, cav map. So let's open that one up with the attribute editor, load up the correct image, which is fence pole or wooden fence pole cav map. Let's open that one up, and again we have to go to the place 2D texture node and switch the repeats from 4 to 1. 1 and 1, there we go. Okay, so let's close that, and everything else should already be set up. Let's go ahead and open up the bump map here, and the bump map I'm going to increase it from 0.02 to 0.2. So the bump effect's a little bit stronger for a wooden fence pole, and everything else looks good. Now again, I don't like the way that this shader over here representation is simply a black sphere, so we're going to change that. I'm just going to move this hypershade over. I'm working with dual screens here in case you're wondering what happened right there. And I'm going to do another render here, and we're going to have a look at that fence pole, see how it's coming out. Oh, and one thing I forgot to do, hit the escape key to cancel the render. I forgot again to do the simplest thing, which is to apply the shader to the object. So I'm going to select these two wooden fence poles, not these little ones here that are kind of slanted here, these horizontal ones, just the vertical fence poles. So this one and this one, those two. and let me bring over here to Hypershade. I'll right click on top of the fence pole material, and then I'll go to assign material to selection. Okay, always have to make sure you assign a material, or else your material is not going to do you any good. Okay, so we'll render this out and see what we have. And there we go. Alright, looking pretty good. Doesn't look too bad. Awesome. So now the wooden fence pole has that nice wooden material applied to it. Now, one thing that I noticed and I don't like is that the wooden fence pole is getting way too much light. You can see here it's kind of burning right there. And I just realized that the reason that's happening is because of the ambient occlusion node. Because we copied over this shader network from the ground material. If you remember the ground material, we had set up a different ambient occlusion value. So what I'm going to do is save this image out, and I'm going to go back to the Hypershade, open up the ambient occlusion node, and there it is. Our max distance was set to 5. I'm going to go ahead and put that to the default, which is 0, so there is no max distance, so the occlusion can continue to sample forever, which in this case I wanted to do that. I'm going to go back to the render view window. Yeah, I'm just going to do a render region, maybe if this wooden fence pole here. I don't have to render the whole thing out again. There we go. And you can automatically start to see that it's a little bit darker. It looks a little bit dirtier and nicer. So here's the before. Kind of blown out, very bright, almost reflective. And here, it's nice and dark and gritty and kind of grimy and stuff, which looks pretty good. And actually, yeah, that looks so much nicer. Look at that. Huge difference. Huge difference. And it's a very small, subtle thing, but man, can it make such a huge impact. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'll probably just take a little color swatch here. I'm going to go to View, go to Grab Swatch to Hypershade Visor. And I'm just going to take a little sample here. And with the middle mouse button, drag and drop that on top of the Hypershade here, on top of the fence pole mat material, so I can get that little thumbnail there, so I can quickly visualize it and see it and identify that texture without having to sit there looking at a black sphere and wondering to myself, what in the world is that? Okay. Alright, so with that done, we're ready to create the material for the other wooden fence poles right there, because that's going to use a different material with similar textures. Okay, so let me close the render view right there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the shading group node here for the fence pole, because it's going to be a similar shading network. It's just going to be a little bit different. So I'll select the shading group node. I'll go up to Edit. Then I'm going to go to Duplicate. And I'm going to go to Shading Network, like usual. And there we go. Now what I'm going to do is, if I hit A here, you can see I have quite a mess. So I'll go up here and click on the Rearrange Graph button. And there we go. Right here, this is the duplicate material. I can tell because it's called Fence Pole Mat 1. Because it's a duplicate, it's going to have the number 1 right there at the end. So what I'm going to do is select this shader right here, and we'll go ahead and click on this button here, the Input and Output Connections button. So you can see it right here in the middle of these 3 arrow icons. We'll click on that middle one, and there we go. Okay, so here it is, Fence Pole Material SG1. We don't want it to be called that, so we got to rename it to keep these things organized. So let's just go ahead and let's rename this. So let's go to the shading group node. We'll right click, go to rename, and let's call this wooden fence board underscore mat SG. I know it's a crazy long name and you could probably find out a better name, but I was never good at naming things. Pretty decent at 3D, but just not good at naming stuff. So I'll call this wooden fence, check my spelling there, wooden fence board underscore mat. There we go. Okay, and all we need to do is change some of these textures around. So let's go to the bump map here, open it up, go to the bump node. We're going to go to the folder icon. We're going to load up a different texture here for the bump. We're going to look for this one up here, wooden fence board bump. So let's load that one up. It's a little bit of a different texture, has different UV coordinates. So now let's go ahead and let's go to the color map here and do the same thing. We'll load up the wooden fence board color, which is right here. Okay, and then we'll load up the wooden fence board cavity map, or cav map for short. There we go. Perfect. Okay, so let's close that. Check the ambient occlusion node. It should be set at 0, and it is. Perfect. Okay, everything else should be good. And we'll update the color swatch here for the wooden fence board material. For the moment though, let's move the hypershade to the side, and let's go ahead and select those 2 wooden fence boards right there, the horizontal ones. There's only 2. And let's bring back the hypershade and right click on top of the material and go to assign material to selection. There we go. Now we can move that hypershade out of the way, and let's go ahead and let's get a little bit closer here to do a render. I don't know, something like this is fine. And let's render that out, see what we have. Okay, so there it is. Here's the wooden fence board right there, and it's got its nice material with texturing and the ambient occlusion composited in there. Looks pretty good. I like the terrain too, looks pretty detailed and pretty nice. And those stones those rocks right there are looking pretty good too. Okay, so there you have it. Now what we're going to do is, if I go over here, let me close that render view window. And if we go over here to the view menu in the viewport and go down to bookmarks, you'll see that there's a bookmark here called final render. And that's not really necessary, but I went ahead and created this final render bookmark so you can go ahead and render this out from the final render angle. So let's render this out from this angle here, which looks pretty interesting. Gives us a good look at the whole scene as well. And there we go. Everything is textured. It's got its materials and everything looking really good. Let me just get rid of this old image there. Alright, so that's going to do it for this chapter here. So just to summarize very quickly, we learned how to apply materials to objects here, and we learned how to customize materials in the shader graph system inside of the hypershades. We were able to connect different types of nodes together to create math operations to change the way our materials look and customize our shader networks or our shader graphs to basically achieve the look that we wanted to. Okay, so what we just saw was one way to work with the hypershade and working with materials inside of Maya using mental rate as well. Okay, so that's going to do it for this chapter and this video. I'm going to end this here, and we're going to continue with the hypershade and working with shading and surfacing in Maya in the next video. So I'll see you then.